I'm not going to act like the Nate Oats and Aidan Shaw confrontation was the biggest deal in the entire world, but an apology was certainly in order. And Nate Oats' apology, well, it left a lot to be desired, I'll promise you that. Plus, speaking of the Tide, a couple of football players, big names, have entered the portal, could either be an option for Missouri. Let's talk about it and more right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and apologizer extraordinaire. And you know what? These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. And speaking of terms and conditions, well, it seemed like there were some conditions to Nate Oats' apology after the game. I thought Dennis Gates handled the whole thing about as well as he possibly could have, even to the point where some Missouri fans were wanting more of a reaction, a bigger reaction from Dennis Gates. Of course, I'm talking about last night, the Missouri-Alabama basketball game. At one point in the first half, seemed like there was maybe a little bit of a confrontation, I believe, with Anthony Robinson, the Missouri guard, and another player for Alabama. Well, Aidan Shaw came over, had some words, only for Nate Oats to basically shove him in the chest and point over toward the Missouri bench, go and get on over there. Well, in terms of the actual message from Nate Oats, I don't really mind, like, hey, man, all right, it's a dead ball. Let's all break it up. Get over to your bench. I don't have a problem with that particular message. I really don't. But for Oats to actually put his hand in Aidan Shaw's chest and extend his arm in an actual, a fairly aggressive shove, not one that would, hurt anybody by any stretch of the imagination. But as they say, there are fighting words. Well, that's kind of a fighting move a little bit. And when actual players on the bench, when they're not allowed to even step foot on the floor without receiving a technical foul or maybe even getting kicked out of the game or suspended in modern day basketball, for the coach to be able to actually put his hands on a player for the other team, it's just absolutely unbelievable to me. The fact that there was no technical foul called in that situation. Frankly, later in the game when an Alabama player, speaking of Anthony Robinson, he got his shot blocked, the guy kind of got in his face and maybe talked a little junk. Well, that ended up in a technical foul. Was that a makeup call from Missouri? Well, you'll just have to decide that for yourself. But I just thought it was hilarious that after the game, I definitely thought, this isn't the biggest deal in the world, but again, certainly an apology is in order here from Nate Oats at the very least. Well, he said, quote, "Before I start talking about the game, I just want to address the situation at the under 8 media timeout, the scuffle that happened next to our bench." A scuffle is a little bit strong of a word, by the way, but regardless, he says, "I apologize to both Coach Gates and Aidan Shaw, and Aidan seems like a great kid. And it's an unfortunate situation, but I apologize to both of them." See, that last sentence there, that kind of went up the old took us a little sideways for this podcaster. I got to be honest. I was fine with all of it, and I was kind of ready to let the whole thing go. I was saying, okay, good for him. He went a little bit over the line and apologized. But then when you go, and it's an unfortunate situation, what do you mean it's an unfortunate situation? And then you say the word but I apologize to both of them. That's just, to me, that's completely skirting responsibility for anything there. That's just you saying, oh, stuff happens, come see, come saw, whatever, but I apologize if that makes you little people happy. I don't know. That just didn't strike me as incredibly sincere to me. Now, I've seen some Alabama people, of course, rush to their coach's defense saying, oh, don't be weak, for example. It wasn't exactly, a violent act or anything like that. I can certainly say that. But again, to me, what really is weak is a coach not having enough discipline to not be able to put his hands on a player of an opposing team. Again, the situation was not really being escalated that much. In fact, Nate Oats was the one, to me, who clearly escalated that situation. Again, if we're going to punish players on the bench for literally stepping on the court during a confrontation, that's apparently an escalation. But a coach putting his hands on a player, that's not an escalation. To me, at the very least, the SEC has got to at least fine the guy, do something. I'm not saying there needs to be a suspension or anything like that, but there needs to be at least some kind of clear message that, hey, this is a line that absolutely should not be crossed from this point forward. Now, to Dennis Gates' credit, after the game, he basically tried to squash any type of potential conflict between him and Nate Oats, saying, hey, Nate apologized. It's all good. I've known Nate since he was a high school basketball coach, essentially. And in fact, Gates seemed much more perturbed about his whole team and just them keeping their cool, because at the very end of the first half, you could see Dennis Gates to Tamar Bates at the end of the first half. Bates was walking over to the Alabama bench. And yes, that was an escalation for sure of some type of conflict there that Bates was doing. And again, Dennis Gates comes up to Tamar Bates and says quite clearly here, this is the easiest lip reading job I've ever had to do in my entire life. Gates comes up to him as he's basically, again, as Bates is kind of trying to escalate something here with the Alabama bench. He says, shut the F up, shut the F up, shut the F up, and play. Except he didn't say F. He said the actual 4-letter word, which I am not allowed to say here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But saying the last one there, shut up and play, essentially, that was the message. He clearly just wants his guys to not be brought down into some weird macho conflict or whatever. This is not that. This isn't the UFC. This is basketball. And clearly Dennis Gates wants his guys to be concentrated on that. But at the same time, he was irritated at the officiating once again. And part of it was for sure the no technical foul there in that incident. You put your hands on the guy, is that not an automatic technical foul? To Gates' point, I couldn't agree more. How is that not a technical foul? So Gates is definitely on that part. And by the way, he did say we came away with 0 free throws in the first half, but it was a chippy game. You said that, right? Right? You said that, correct? But we shot 0 free throws in the first half, so I don't know. Now, to be fair to the officials, you know what? Bama only shot, I believe, 6 free throws to Missouri's 0, and both teams shot a significantly more amount of free throws in the second half. It certainly seemed like the refs decided, hey, this game maybe got a little too physical in the first half, and with that chippiness there that we saw from both sides, let's maybe call absolutely everything in the second half, and that's kind of exactly what happened. Now, as for the game itself, I thought Missouri played hard and once again played pretty well for the most part during large portions of that game against a really, really good opponent. So again, it was nice to see the effort. Missouri just does not quite have enough right now. Interestingly, of course, Mark Sears, who I went on and on about on yesterday's program, didn't really play that much. Had an injury, left the game, and just was not his night for a few different reasons there. But ultimately, Rylan Griffin scored 16 points in the last 10 minutes for Alabama, who, almost literally barely missed a shot there down the last quarter of the game. It was really something remarkable to watch. And again, while I find Nate Oats to be not the most likable guy in the world in terms of a human being, I got to say I enjoy the style of basketball his teams play. And I think actually when Missouri is at its best here in the future under Dennis Gates, that offense will probably look pretty similar to what Gates and company are going to employ. And speaking of Alabama, some big Alabama football news the last couple weeks as well, of course, and some new news. Two major players from the Tide's roster last season are going to be entering the transfer portal. One in particular could be an option for Missouri, so let's talk about that and all the news on the gridiron coming up here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about LinkedIn Jobs, because at the start of this new year, every small business owner is asking himself or herself the same question. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level this year? Well, LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And I can just tell you, when you find that person, it's the best day of your life. Suddenly, things will be off of your plate and you'll be able to concentrate on what you do best. That's why LinkedIn Jobs isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire on the web. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. That's Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. And you know what? Still not a lot happening in terms of actual news or tidbits or really rumors or innuendo or anything like that on the defensive coordinator front for the Tigers, but certainly a lot happening down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I'm not just talking about Nate Oats and his mealy-mouthed apologies. No, of course, with Nick Saban being replaced, that opened a 30-day transfer portal at the Alabama program, and a couple big names have entered this morning officially. Caleb Downs, who is a safety, one of the best players in the country, according to some, likely a 2026 draft pick, so whoever gets him would likely have him for the next couple seasons. How much Missouri is involved there is really beyond me at this point. But there's one more guy, though, who Missouri almost certainly is going to be at least reaching out to, kicking the tires on. It's Kadyn Proctor, who is an absolutely massive 6'8", 365-pound lineman. He was actually ranked as the number 1 offensive tackle coming out of his high school class just this last year of 2023, and this past season as a true freshman for the Tide. He started each and every game. So obviously he'd be a literal and figuratively huge pickup for Missouri, though the young man is originally from the state of Iowa, and there is some rumor and innuendo with him. The rumor and innuendo is that, well, he's feeling a little homesick and might wanting to be going back to the state of Iowa, so perhaps the Hawkeyes might be a good fit there. But you know what? Missouri isn't that far from Iowa last time I checked either. In fact, I believe they border the state. I'm going to have to check my geography there. But seriously, Kadyn Proctor, a guy that Missouri did recruit coming out of high school from Iowa, so the relationship is already there between Eli Drinkwitz. Who knows? Stranger things have happened, but from all indications I've seen, most people are putting their money on the Iowa Hawkeyes getting Kadyn Proctor. And believe it or not, one more Alabama note that does have something to do with the University of Missouri. Maurice Linguist, who a couple days ago, Gabe DeArmond over at Power Mizzou put out as an interesting name to watch for the Missouri defensive coordinator job. Well, the interesting part of it to me is that Maurice Linguist is the head coach at Buffalo. Well, at least he used to be. Now he's the co-defensive coordinator at Alabama. And the reason this is interesting to me as a Missouri fan is this is a new trend here. It's quite possible that Missouri themselves could hire a head coach to be their defensive coordinator from a lower level of college football. indeed, this is a new trend here that makes quite a bit of sense. A couple years ago, guys who were head coaches, that would be seen as a downgrade. Well, these days, not only is so much money swishing around in the SEC and in the Big Ten in particular to fill these offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator positions, but also because of the transfer portal and essentially which has become college free agency every single season, the last couple seasons at least. Well, that means that if you're the coach at Buffalo, hey, you get this under the radar guy, maybe a late developing guy, a late bloomer like I talked about yesterday. Well, you're no longer really getting the reward of getting to keep those guys around as much. If they can just transfer without any penalty, hey, I'm okay with it for the most part. I've gotten used to it. I see the argument for it. And again, why should we punish the late bloomers? But at the same time, if you're somebody like Maurice Linguist, you're probably going, well, wait a second, that's all well and good, but why should I stay here if my best players are going to be getting poached? My best 3 or 4 players, whatever it might be, are going to get poached each and every season. That's going to hinder my ability to move up the ranks in my chosen field of profession here. So again, Maurice Linguist wasn't an interesting name for Missouri for very long. Obviously, he's off the market, but it does make you think. It makes you widen the pool of potential guys and say, hey, maybe there's a head coach down there in the group of 5 level or even lower than that might think, I could be the defensive coordinator of Missouri, not only get a pay raise, but this might actually be a better opportunity for me to actually go up the ladder. So again, a new trend here and one to watch if you're a Missouri fan. And one more football note here. DJ Wesolak, former Tiger, former Boonville Pirate, entered the portal and has ended up at Oregon State, which is a pretty good landing spot for DJ. Although, speaking of landing spots, not sure where Oregon State is going to be playing in a conference next season. Is the 2-pack with Washington State, is that really going to be a thing? Are they going to be independent next season? Who the heck knows? I haven't really seen any new information on that particular game, but it'll be interesting to see if DJ Wesolak can live up to his billing out west. But by the way, speaking of some injury news here, John Tonje taking a medical red shirt this season, the Missouri wing for the basketball team. Colorado State transfer, was the first guy Missouri actually took in the transfer portal this past offseason. So obviously Gates and his staff expected big things from Tonje, but apparently that foot injury just could never quite come back, had a setback at some point. So perhaps we'll see him on the roster next season. Although, again, in this new world of the portal, who the heck knows? A couple good things from this game. Obviously, multiple positives to take away here, although Missouri obviously didn't have quite enough to take down the Tide, especially in the last quarter of that game. Fortunately, though, I did think it was Jesus Carolero-Martin's best game as a Tiger. Definitely helps when you can knock down jump shots. Let's just be realistic about it. But I also like when Carolero puts the ball on the floor and drives. He's got a better handle maybe than you might expect at this size. He can certainly take some bigger guys off the dribble, and I like when he's a little bit more aggressive putting the ball on the floor. And finally, it was just nice to see Nick Honor get the shot going. I mean, guys, I know people have been frustrated with him the last few games, but you simply can't just bench Nick Honor. And to the point of Matt Harris, by the way, over at Rock M Nation today, I thought had a really good piece about basically the point I'm kind of making here, which is that, hey, these seniors, these guys you've had on your roster, even a guy like Connor Vanover, who obviously has not been what Dennis Gates expected in terms of a floor spacer, a big guy who can step out and knock down a three-pointer, that hasn't really happened yet. But if he were to just, for example, just bench Connor Vanover the rest of the season or something, the problem is Gates spent a lot of time actually talking Vanover into not only coming to Missouri, but just playing one more season of college basketball, period. I'm sure a big part of Vanover would have liked to have just been done with college and move on to the real world at a certain point. So to me, The main point here is that, yes, you do have to remember that these guys are human beings and that other human beings, other guys you might want to recruit in the future from the portal are going to notice when guys who you brought in and maybe begged to come, promise some stuff to, when that stuff doesn't come to fruition, players notice and they talk too, by the way. So that whole strategy of, just bring in the freshmen and bench the old guys, it's not quite that simple. And coming up, while some people are a little bit down on Dennis Gates right now, I think I might actually have to modify a slight criticism I've had of Dennis Gates here the past few weeks or so. But you know what? First, before we get there, let's talk about FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And did I say the regular season is wrapping up? No, the wild card round is over. The divisional round is here. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so incredibly easy to use, with so many different betting options like the Kansas City Chiefs plus 2.5, or the Kansas City Chiefs money line plus 122, or you could be an evil person and bet on the Bills, I suppose, as well. But either way, you got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a chip shot extra point. It's FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities in life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real-life situations? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in more than a decade. And that's a really helpless feeling if you can imagine your significant other getting sick while a supply chain issue keeps them from the life-saving medication that person needs. Well, thankfully, we'll be okay in my house because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could really happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. One thing I've learned the past few years doing this podcast is that some people just like to panic or wallow in negativity, whatever it might be. And I'm reminded of week 2 of the football season this past 2023, when after that game against Middle Tennessee, when Missouri held on for a, less than 1 touchdown win, I was fairly negative after that game and critical of the offense. And after I was done, I thought, Missouri is 2-0. Was I being too harsh there? And whether I was or I was not, all I know is there were a whole lot of people who made my comments look rather, pedestrian by comparison. Even had somebody I talked to fairly regularly saying that I wasn't critical enough too. But regardless, man, some people were going, Missouri's going to go 0 and they're going to go 2-12. They're going to go 0-10 the rest of the season. Well, thankfully that did not happen. And fortunately, I don't see a lot of reasons to panic with Dennis Gates at this point either. And I will say I did have I was getting a little bit tired of Dennis maybe in the post games complaining about the officiating at a certain point, because really I was kind of thinking, there's a reason Missouri isn't shooting a ton of free throws. It's because they're not beating guys off the dribble enough in terms of dribble penetration, and they're just not getting into the paint frequently enough. But you know what? Maybe I need to modify my criticism a little bit here. Maybe even throw it into the trash, because last night, again, Missouri lobbying for his guys, Dennis Gates lobbying for his guys. especially after a first half where once again Missouri shoots 0 free throws. And whether he even believes that or not, how can I really be mad at Dennis Gates for basically doing what Phil Jackson did for the Lakers and the Bulls all those years ago, when he would basically send messages to the referees, to the league, to the opposition, to anybody he wanted to his own team, oftentimes through the media. So I think Dennis Gates has studied probably just about everybody in terms of basketball coaches. I'm sure he has studied that particular technique as well, how to get what you want by using the media for your own purposes. So really, if Dennis Gates is doing that, how can I really be mad at him whatsoever? So everything I said about Dennis Gates, maybe bad look, complaining about the officiating post-game maybe a couple times ago, especially against Illinois. I wasn't a huge fan of it. You know what? I take it all back. And thanks, as always, for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. Coming up later this week, I'm going to talk to Brian Smith on Friday, Locked On's head recruiting analyst, recruiting director, recruiting president of these United States. I don't know what fancy title I'm supposed to officially give him here, but regardless, Brian Smith knows his stuff, and we're going to talk about Kawan Lacey, Courtney Crutchfield, heck, even maybe a Missouri defensive coordinator if there's one hired by then. So until Thursday's show as well, I'll see you Friday with Brian, but I'll see you tomorrow right here on Locked On Mizzou as well. See you then.